Breaking news. Out of Las Vegas, some shocking roster decisions are shaking up Raider Nation. The Raiders have finalized their practice squad, and while some familiar names made the cut, one surprising omission has left fans stunned. A recently drafted player, who many thought was a lock, has been left out. What does this mean for the Raiders moving forward? Let's break it all down. So here's the latest update. The Las Vegas Raiders have officially set their practice squad. And while several expected names are back, one decision in particular has fans scratching their heads. The Raiders chose to keep wideouts like Alex Bachman, Shedrick Jackson, and Justin Charter, but they passed on Tommy Mellott, their very own sixth-round draft pick. For many, that's a shocker. Mellott, who was drafted alongside quarterback Cam Miller, seemed like a perfect developmental receiver. Instead, the Raiders went with veterans and fresh signings. But before we dive deeper into this roster shakeup, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss breaking Raiders updates. Now let's move on to the details you need to know. According to insiders, the Raiders wanted to prioritize experience and reliability, even if that meant cutting ties with a rookie draft pick. For example, Alex Bachman brings more veteran presence compared to Mellott, and Shedrick Jackson, he absolutely flashed during the preseason. But here's where it gets interesting. Many fans assumed Mellott would at least land a spot on the practice squad. Instead, he's on the outside looking in. It raises big questions about the Raiders' long-term plans at wide receiver and whether Mellott's NFL future is already in jeopardy. Now, one name that continues to spark debate is Andre Carter. And honestly, this one is still a head-scratcher. Carter looked solid during preseason, quick off the edge, disruptive at times, yet not only did the Raiders pass on bringing him back, but no other team has claimed him either. For a player with his physical tools, that's surprising. Here's the thing fans sometimes forget. Once a player clears waivers, it's no longer just about the team's interest, it's also about the player's choice. Just look at running back Sincere McCormick. The Raiders wanted him back, but he chose to sign with the 49ers, chasing what could be a clearer opportunity down the road. And while he won't be unseating Christian McCaffrey anytime soon, all it takes is one chance for a player to break through. So could Andre Carter be thinking the same way? Maybe he sees a better path with another franchise. Maybe he doesn't want to stick around in Las Vegas as a backup project. The door is still open, but for now, his future remains uncertain. From a talent standpoint, Carter is intriguing. Long, lean, explosive, he reminds you of an Arden Key-type player. Not always finishing plays early in his career, but showing enough flashes to stick around in the league for years. The upside is there, and that's why it's so surprising the Raiders let him go. Of course, Las Vegas did make a move to address depth at pass rusher, claiming Brennan Jackson off waivers. But the bigger question is what happens behind stars like Max Crosby and Malcolm Kuntz. If those guys miss snaps, someone has to step up. And that's where a player like Charles Snowden becomes critical. This is now his third year in silver and black, and the clock is ticking. He doesn't need to be a superstar, but if he can't develop into a steady contributor this season, the Raiders will be forced to look elsewhere. One name that quietly stood out on the practice squad list, and honestly, a player I'm glad to see back, is Chris Collier. This guy was one of the few young backs who really impressed me during preseason. His vision, his burst, and the way he hit the lanes, you could tell he was seeing the field differently than most rookies. Every time he got touches, you felt like something might happen. Now here's the twist. I'm not completely sold on the Raiders' current running back depth. Zamir White has power but feels capped in terms of growth. Raheem Mostert brings veteran savvy, but his best days may already be behind him. In terms of upside, Collier might actually be the most exciting piece of the group. The question is whether he can develop quickly enough to carve out a real role on Sundays. Another name worth highlighting is Terrell Edmunds. If you've watched him closely, you know this guy plays fast and physical. He didn't just show up. He popped off the screen with the way he attacked run fits and made tackles in space. Don't let the practice squad label fool you. Edmunds is one of those players who could be elevated to the active roster sooner than later. And when that happens, I wouldn't be shocked if he becomes a regular contributor for the Raiders' defense. Now, not every decision made sense. The Raiders also kept Jafori Harvey, and that raised some eyebrows. Harvey had a couple moments in camp where he looked promising, but across the preseason games, he just didn't show enough consistency. Compared to someone like Andre Carter, who flashed much more upside, this move feels puzzling. It makes you wonder if there's more going on behind the scenes. Maybe Carter is eyeing another team, or maybe the Raiders see something in Harvey we haven't. Still, the practice squad is full of wild cards. Guys like Matt Jones, who flashed here and there, and Trayvon May, who picked up 2 sacks in preseason, all remain in the mix. Even veterans like Antonio Mafi bring steady value, and he's the type of player you can easily see being called up for game day depth. The bottom line, this practice squad isn't just a group of backups. It's a mix of hidden talent, developing pieces, and insurance policies, and some of these names could play very real roles for the Raiders sooner than anyone expects. When you look at the offensive line, the Raiders' choices raise some interesting questions. The interior seems fairly set with Alex Kappa and a couple of others, but depth is still shaky. Don't be surprised if Antonio Mafi ends up becoming that trusted fourth guard, a player they can lean on when things get tough. On the defensive side, one of the more intriguing stories is Loki Tassi. He's a fan favorite, no doubt about it, and his flashes of raw power haven't gone unnoticed. Still, he's a developmental project. Put him up against an elite like Chris Jones, and he'd get exposed right now. But the good news is that Tossie falls under the International Pathway Program, which gives the Raiders time to shape him into something more. Meanwhile, the secondary remains a mixed bag. Trey Taylor and JT Woods are back, but neither truly impressed in preseason action. In fact, the hype surrounding Woods in camp never matched what showed up on tape. On the other hand, Greedy Vance is a different story. He reminds me a lot of Nate Hubbs when he first came in, aggressive, tough, strong against the run, and willing to blitz. Coverage will need work, just like Hobbs early on, but the foundation is there. I expect Vance to get called up at some point this season. Then we get to the offensive tackle spot, and this is where things get really interesting. The Raiders brought Dalton Wagner back to the practice squad, but the real headline is the decision to waive Thayer Munford. And the timing of it all raises eyebrows. They didn't cut him immediately, they waited an extra day. That delay suggests the Raiders may be trying to sneak him back onto the practice squad, hoping other teams have already filled their rosters and won't claim him. But here's the risk. If another team sees Munford as a potential starter, he's gone. And I'll be honest, I'm not high on Munford myself. The tape doesn't lie. He struggled to hold up as a reliable tackle, and there were better options floating on the waiver wire. Take Carter Warren, for example, a former third-round pick who was just claimed by Atlanta. He could realistically step in and start for the Falcons right away, especially with their right tackle out for the year. That's the kind of upside the Raiders need to be chasing, and it's fair to question if they're settling instead of upgrading at one of the most important positions on the field. The offensive tackle spot continues to be one of the biggest question marks for the Raiders. Think about it this way. If Colton Miller were to miss time, the Raiders would suddenly be scrambling to figure out who could protect the edge. That's how thin the depth really feels. Yes, there were options on the market. Players like Carter Warren and even veterans such as Dan Skipper were available at one point. Instead, the Raiders chose to waive Thayer Munford a day after final cuts. And that timing wasn't an accident, it was by design. By waiting until other teams had already filled their rosters, the Raiders likely hoped Munford would clear waivers so they could stash him on the practice squad. But here's the gamble. Once you expose a player, you risk losing him altogether. We've seen this before. Last season, the Raiders tried the same maneuver with Bam Adebayo Young, only to see the Eagles swoop in and claim him. It could easily happen again with Munford. Now here's where the debate really starts. Do the Raiders actually need Munford back? Because to be honest, the upside may lie elsewhere. Charles Grant has shown flashes that Munford simply hasn't. Grant's athleticism jumps out on tape, quick feet, elite movement, the kind of tools you need at tackle in today's NFL. Munford, on the other hand, has always looked heavy-footed. And in this league, if you can't move, you don't last. Sure, there are rare exceptions. Trent Brown carved out a strong career despite limited mobility, but those cases are few and far between. More often than not, slow-footed tackles flame out quickly. That's why many scouts were skeptical of players like Don Jones coming out of college despite impressive film, and those doubts haven't gone away. Though the Raiders now face a choice: play it safe with a familiar but limited option in Munford, or take a real swing on the raw potential of Charles Grant. One gives you stability, the other might just give you a future cornerstone. One of the most interesting storylines right now is the return of Amari Cooper, and the first glimpse we got of him back in silver and black. Sure, he was only stretching, but the sight of him wearing number 19 was enough to stir up buzz. You could already tell this is a player with something to prove. At his presser, Cooper sounded sharp, focused, and determined. He knows he's not the same burner he was in his early Raider days, but don't get it twisted, this guy can still win. He may have lost a step, but in a one-on-one matchup, he can separate and create space, something this wide receiver room desperately needs. That's especially important when you look at the current group. Dante Thornton is big, physical, and dangerous in jump ball situations, but he's still learning the art of route running. Jack Beck is a raw talent who needs refining. That's where Omari's presence becomes invaluable, not just as a pass catcher, but as a mentor who can fine-tune these young guys' games. And then there's the Jacoby Myers situation. Despite all the trade rumors swirling around him, he was still out there at practice, working, competing, staying engaged. That tells me he may not be going anywhere, at least not right now. Here's the thing about Myers: he's not flashy, he's not a burner, he's not elite in one particular category, but he's really good at almost everything: strong hands, reliable routes, a knack for making the tough catches. Pair him with Amari Cooper, who still has the ability to create separation, and suddenly this offense has a balance it's been missing. Even beyond the on-field impact, Cooper brings credibility. Young receivers like Trey Tucker, Jack Beck, and Dante Thornton will grow just by watching him prepare, by learning the subtle details of his craft. And that's the hidden value here. He's not just catching passes, he's setting a standard. For the Raiders, Cooper isn't just a reunion story. He's a difference maker, both now and for the future of this receiver room. Here's the reality with Amari Cooper: he may not be the same elite separator he once was, but he knows the craft. The footwork, the timing, the tricks of the trade, he can pass that knowledge down to younger receivers still figuring it out. That alone is worth something. And the contract, even better. The Raiders locked him in on a one-year deal worth just $4 million. That's about as low risk, high reward as it gets in today's NFL. If he struggles and only hauls in a dozen catches all season, fine, it's $4 million. But if he finds his rhythm, if he still has some juice left, then the Raiders may have landed one of the sneakiest value signings of the offseason. Either way, it helps this young receiver room. Guys like Dante Thornton, Trey Tucker, and Jack Beck now have a veteran voice to learn from, a guy who's been through it all, from early stardom to proving himself all over again. But here's where things get really interesting. A rumor has been swirling, and it involves one of the NFL's biggest names, Micah Parsons. Benjamin Albright, a well-respected insider who covers the Denver Broncos, recently said something that caught everyone's attention. According to him, the Cowboys have fielded calls from multiple teams about Parsons. One of those teams, the Green Bay Packers, who reportedly already have framework in place for a potential $45 million per year contract with Parsons' camp. But here's the kicker: Albright also mentioned another team that has apparently checked in: Las Vegas Raiders. Now, nothing is concrete. There's no official trade lined up. But the fact that the Raiders are even being mentioned in the same breath as Micah Parsons is huge. Imagine pairing a generational pass rusher like Parsons with Max Crosby. That's the kind of move that doesn't just improve a defense, it changes the entire identity of a franchise. Now here's where things get wild. According to Benjamin Albright, the Raiders actually picked up the phone and called the Cowboys about Micah Parsons. Let that sink in for a second. Do the Raiders need Parsons? Not really. This isn't 2018 or 2019, when the pass rush was one of the worst in football. Today, the Raiders already have Max Crosby wreaking havoc, Malcolm Koonce making strides, Tyree Wilson developing, and Christian Wilkins anchoring the inside. This group is strong as it is. But Parsons? That's a whole different level. Picture it: Crosby on one edge, Parsons on the other, with Wilkins and Butler crashing inside. That's not just a good pass rush. That's a nightmare for every offensive line in the league. You can't double-team everyone. Somebody is getting home every single snap. Of course, a move like that wouldn't come cheap. Parsons would demand a record-breaking extension, and the Raiders just dropped serious money on Wilkins. But with Wilkins' big cap hit set to ease up in the future, the timing could actually work. Still, talent isn't everything. To unlock that kind of defense, you need the right coordinator, the right system. We've seen dominant defensive lines under guys like Vic Fangio, Steve Spagnuolo, and Robert Saleh. Can Pete Carroll recreate that kind of magic in Vegas? That's the big question. Even if this trade never happens, just the thought of Parsons in silver and black alongside Crosby gives you chills. It's a reminder that the Raiders are thinking big. They're not settling for good enough. So here's where I'll leave it. What do you make of the Raiders' practice squad moves? How do you feel about Thayer Munford getting waived? Do you like the Amari Cooper signing and Jacoby Myers sticking around? And most of all, what's your take on the Parsons rumor? Because if that dream scenario ever came true, the Raiders' defense wouldn't just be good, it could be unstoppable.